So where the sky I've already laid in, but we're going to just block in the color for the water. And there's this, where I'm mixing is a mix of ultramarine blue and burnt sienna with a little bit of white, which is making it quite gray, but we want it to be a little bit bluer. And I'm going to drop in just a little bit of the phthalo blue. Phthalo blue is very strong color, so you really don't need much. I'm going to add a bit more white to that, keeping in mind that acrylics dry darker, so when you think you've got the perfect color, add a bit more white. So we're just going to, I'm not going to fret too much about getting that perfect line along the top, as we have some land on the far, or at the horizon. So we're just and we will be layering in other colors there. Just going to lift that up. So this color looks like it should be pretty good. I think I'm just going to get it a little bit lighter as we come forward. And the main thing I want to do here is make sure I'm not leaving any little pinholes in the paint. It helps to use enough paint so that you're not getting those. And I think I'm just going to take this a little more, pull a little bit more burnt sienna there. Just going to go a little bit darker in there. It's always nice when you're painting a large flat surface to vary the color a little bit. It just makes it a lot more interesting. And in the reference, the water is a little bit darker over that side. So I think we'll put just a little bit on top of that rock there. So we're going to switch this now. We're going to come into the turquoise water of the shallows, or the blue-green. So the turquoise you get by using the phthalo blue and the yellow light. You can use any yellow, but the yellow light's going to give you the more saturated one. I didn't clean my brush here, so that has a little bit of tempering effect on that, but we'll just come in there and just, this is still wet, so I'm just loosely blending that wet color into the upper color. I'm going to add a little bit of white to that just to get that. And again, it's the same thing. I'm just laying down the colors so that they can blend wet into wet, and you actually end up getting a variety of more interesting colors. I'm going to go back to a slightly darker, and we'll just add a tiny bit of yellow to that. Whoops. The phthalo blue is very strong, so the yellow is pretty easy. Like, it's not going to have a major influence on that or easily dominate that color. So now I want to come back down into the lighter color, and we're just going to sweep. I think we want to get a little lighter than that. And the chalk lines you see, those are the rocks that are going to come in. It's a very loose drawing. I didn't need anything too amazing there because I knew I'd be painting over those lines, so I'll just re-chalk those lines back in. So I think we want to keep getting lighter as we come into the foamy water. I want to go back to the deeper turquoise just above that rock there, and because there's already white down, I'm going to go a little bit darker than I might normally, because as I'm blending that wet into wet, it will get a little bit lighter. So that's nice. So we're just going to now, as we come into this quiet area in the rock, I'm going to go back to this ultramarine blue, and it's quite shadowed in there, so I'm just going to blend that in. This is sort of a quiet area that is so I just made that a little bit darker, and I'll make that darker still, just as we come into the shallow. I'm going to take this down probably farther than I need to, but it's nice to have that safety. So I'm going to get a clean brush, a 1-inch Aquamaster, and just to soften that down a bit. This is the quiet water, so I really don't want to see too much in the way of turmoil there. And again, I'm making sure that I'm doing plenty big enough to go outside the lines so that when I paint the rock, it will be all good. So we're now taking the ultramarine blue and burnt sienna together to make a black. And depending on how you mix it, you can make it a blue black or a brown black. Just by mixing the two colors. So actually, before I start painting, I'm just going to do a chalk line roughly representing where I'm going to use white rather than. So we're just sketching in this rock. That should be good enough. We can always expand or contract this rock later. And this is just the base color of the rock. So a lot of this is going to get covered. But that's just to give us something to work on top of. There's going to be quite a bit of white water splashing up on these rocks, so you don't need to fret too much about making it the lines perfect. Maybe just take that right up a little bit higher, right onto the chalk. And I think I'm going to pull that out a bit farther. So I just didn't mix up very much of that. I never worry about mixing up too much of a color because it's always nice. Like this time, it's probably a little hard to see in the video, but this is a little browner or a little more desaturated dark orange. But it's nice to have the variety in the paint colors. Really adds a lot of natural look to the painting, as in nature the colors are always so subtly different from one another that when you paint straight out of the tube, it's going to look very flat. I could get a bigger brush to do this. In fact, I will. Just use that Aquamaster I was using before. In my thrifty nature, did not take out enough blue. This palette is as dirty as it is because I did a previous painting on it yesterday. So, but the colors were close enough to this one that I didn't need to clean that, or too lazy to clean it. It was probably a little bit more accurate. I also don't like to waste all that paint that's on there. There are times that I definitely will start with a cleaner palette, just because of the nature of the colors in the painting. I'm going to be using knives to create the rock texture. And this is a Body Shop knife used for putting Bondo on car repairs, but it also makes a very good palette, which is what we're going to use here. You can use any other palette, but I just find this very helpful. So I'm going to, I don't normally mix with a knife unless I'm painting with a knife, which we're going to do. So we're going to mix a dark brown to start. I like that color, but it's not really dark enough, so I'm just going to come to the side and make it darker. Scrape off the excess paint. And this is sort of a bluish color, which I don't actually mind. I think we'll take a look at that. So the idea when you're painting this is we're trying to get a scumbled texture on the rocks. One of the advantages why I like to use the knife is because it gives us very random marks. So I'm holding the knife just by the fingertips so I can put the knife nice and flat on the surface. And we just drag it. You don't really have a tremendous amount of control of what texture you're going to get, so we just can keep adding to that as we want more. I'm going to get that a little higher up there, and we're going to try and put this color on most of the black, even the stuff down near the water, which is generally wet, so it's dark. The lighter colors tend to be up in the drier areas where the rock has had a chance to dry out. And we can go back and forth several times. and you can put the dark back in, scumble some. That area didn't get too scumbled, a little too much pressure. You can turn the knife over and use the other side, but the trick here is to get that scumbling. I'll just do a little bit on the side. I've heard a lot of very stupid comments about not painting the sides. One of them has said that painting is a two-dimensional media, so you shouldn't paint the side. I sometimes think that they had a little too much Kool-Aid. So now I'm switching back to that, or switching over to that color. So I'm not really waiting for that to dry. We might get a little bit of mixture of the two colors, which is always nice. We don't have a lot of that. Haven't done too much down the bottom because most of that is light rock. I think I'm gonna get a little bluer. I don't know why I didn't move that knife brush, it's sort of in the way. Not very blue, is it? Sorry, keep that in the camera. So now we're going to switch to that lighter color. One of the nice things about these is you can flip them over and use the other side if you want a clean area to work from. So I've added yellow ochre into the burnt sienna and ultramarine blue. And we're going to add quite a bit more, and we're going to go lighter still. Keep in mind all these colors are going to dry darker. I think it's one of the biggest drawbacks to acrylic paint. We might put some of that in. I don't think that's really light enough, but it doesn't hurt. So I'm going to do that over to the side because I'm just going to pick up a bit more of that yellow. Sort of running out of that. So you can use any yellow. Really in this, the yellow ochre just makes it a little bit easier to keep it natural, but if you actually mix the red, blue, and yellow light together, you would get a yellow ochre. I'm getting some lovely texture through there. And don't get your mind set on too much of what texture you want. This is very much about creating random texture. I think we're just going to hit just a little bit of that up there. This is very much about letting things happen. I'm just going to put some this gray tone. We'll come back in here after this dries and put in some cracks and pockets and whatnot. I think I just want to go a little bit darker to add some light on that back rock there. But it's a good way to use up paint on your palette. especially when you're working in neutrals, because you keep mixing colors together. Watercolorists like to call it mud, but really what it is some gorgeous desaturated colors that work very well in acrylic. Just spraying a little water on a paper towel just to take off that remaining chalk drawing that's in there. That looks like that's canvas. I like to take that off as soon as I'm not using it anymore. It helps with that where I was thinking that was chalk there, but it's actually raw canvas. But it also, I've had the case where I've taken paintings to galleries and it still had the chalk on there. So we're going to do one last pass with the knife, I think, and so we're going to mix a much lighter, let's get that. The much lighter color, but I'm going to just take the edge off of that a little bit and we'll just see what that looks like. I don't think that's going to be light enough because remember, it's going to dry darker. Let me just... And so if we put a little red in that and a little blue, we'll make that into a little bit grayer, that red and blue being purple, which will desaturate the yellow. I think that looks pretty good. So we're just going to brush this on the knife this time. And we're just going to drag. Now, so this paint is pretty dry down there now, so I can get even more texture because the palette knife has put texture down with the paint. And so you're going to get more or less texture depending on how much paint is on that knife. And so I'm just going to pick up some more of that, just put that on a little thicker there for this side. So I'll come across and hit some of those high spots. And I think I'm going to add more white to that. And it will actually just come in. No, there's not much left there. So I got some white over there. Just want this to be a little grayer than what's there. So we'll put that down and we'll come. I think we'll just hit just a little bit there. I don't think we're going to go back there. So we're going to do a little bit of this with the rigger, which is another great tool for doing some scumbling, but not in the typical way that we do it, where that brush is a little on the stiff side. So I'm just going to pick that up on the rigger, and then we're going to just, using the rigger on its side, I'm just going to reinforce the top edge of that rock, give it a little bit more light, and so very light touch. And so using the rigger on its side gives it a much more uncontrolled or scumbled stroke to that. We're not after the fine lines that we typically use the rigger for. And I think that looks pretty good. Maybe Now, I think what I'd like to do now is actually just come in there and add some little bit of blue highlights in there. And this is on the wet rock more than the dry rock, so we're just trying to scrape together some Scottish paint here. We don't need a lot. And so I'm going to put this just sort of on the shadow side of the rock. So this is where the light has just creeped in a bit. That was a little bit solid there, into the shadow side of the rock. And just gives it a little bit more dimension. This is a major gap in the rock, so this is a downturned side. And we'll do a little bit over here. It's nice to have the colors a little bit balanced from left to right. And so I think we'll just get a little bit more in there. We want to be careful dropping any in here because that yellowish color paint is still. Let's just see what happens, and it does mix. Actually not bad. There's not a lot of yellow in that, so it's not going real green on us. And so it's just making the rock a little bit more interesting, having these various colors come through. Of course, you can't go too far with anything. Possibly not chocolate, but I've never discovered that. Okay.
Very solemn, but very, very happy. Jonathan woke a little after the hour, and all was ready, and he sat up in bed, propped up with pillows. He answered his "I will" firmly and strong. I could hardly speak. My heart was so full that even those words seemed to choke me. The dear sisters were so kind. Please God, I shall never, never forget them, nor the grave and sweet responsibilities I have taken upon me. I must tell you of my wedding present. When the chaplain and the sisters had left me alone with my husband, oh, Lucy, it is the first time I have written the words "my husband." Left me alone with my husband, I took the book from under his pillow and wrapped it up in white paper, and tied it with a little bit of pale blue ribbon which was round my neck, and sealed it over the knot with sealing wax, and for my seal I used my wedding ring. Then I kissed it and showed it to my husband, and told him that I would keep it so, and then it would be an outward and visible sign for us all our lives that we trusted each other, that I would never open it unless it were for his own dear sake, or for the sake of some stern duty. Then
So I'm just mixing up a lighter crack color. So we're just going to start laying some of this down. Again, trying to follow what we see in the rocks. And we can use these lines to help give some direction to the rock face. So we sort of see a crack coming along here, and so we'll just extend that down into there. You don't want to take out all the very natural lines that we've created using the knife on the surface. And you want some of the cracks to be very thin and others can be thicker. I think we'll do a little bit over here. So we're just going to mix up a little bit more of the turquoise or blue-green color. And so that's the yellow light and the phthalo blue and white. So we're going to be adding white to this. So when we start defining the waves, we're going to use a light version of this, not jumping right to the white, which too many novices would do. So I'm going to come in here and just start to, we're going to have sort of a wave coming along there, and we'll have some crests. I'm using a number 2 rigger here. So it's nice because you can push down on it and get quite a long line. I've got quite a blob of paint on the tip there. And then come up on the point and get quite a thin line. So this is a larger wave just coming in crashing, whereas this is the residue of a previous wave that is just sort of washed back out a bit. So, and then not going to do a tremendous amount of work on any one part here. This is just sort of like a very loose drawing to get an idea of what I'm going to do with these different waves. So we're get something happening out here and sort of an upturn splash happening out there. And so it pays to go a fairly light touch when you're first sketching this in, so you don't lose all the underlying color. And so, and again, like in the rocks where the lines can help define what's happening or to the shape of the rock, the lines that you put in the water can go a long way to shaping what that water's doing. So we're going to have water coming over. That's not watery enough. This paint is quite watery. And that allows me to do nice fine lines when there isn't too much paint on the brush. So I'm just taking some of the paint off the brush. And so we can sweep some of the water coming over that rock. I didn't spend a lot of time on that rock. And so we'll just bring, and this water is coming right up. And so this is white water in here, but this, what I'm not really painting the water is I'm giving the upper edge of that rock a little bit more ragged shape to match the texture that we put in there. So we're just going to, and this is just the if you will, the shadow color of the white water that we're putting in there right now. Now, what I've just done there, I've just laid some paint down, and so now taking the water, or all the paint off, and just using some water to sort of soften the edges and turn that into more of a glaze application. So back to the water. I didn't spend a lot of time on this upper edge because I was going to be bringing the water right on top of that. This is a sort of an angled rock. I don't like that point there very much. And there's a little bit of this spillage coming up into that quiet area in the rocks. So we're just going to do another tracery just out here. The turquoise color you see is really just the water coming into the shallow areas, and the deeper blue we see out beyond is the much deeper water. This particular shot is off the coast of Nova Scotia. So one of the things, I'm constantly looking at the reference, and I never am too concerned that if I'm painting exactly what is in the reference. What my main concern is that I'm doing something that looks like water. So there's actually water coming over this back part. So I'm going to jump up into a lighter version. And so it's similar to the way the rocks are done. I'm deliberately trying to get some scumbling out of the brush rather than trying to paint the foam or foaming water or the turbulent water of the cascade. This is not quite white. This is, I've mixed the white into the turquoise, but it's certainly getting much closer to the brilliant white of the final. I think, well, I'm going to let that set up a bit. And while that's setting up, we're going to move out and add into the deep water. So we're going to use quite a dark color. And I'm just going to, that I don't think dark enough will. And again, we always have to allow for the fact that this color is going to dry darker. So when you're doing these ripples in the water, they look fairly chaotic, but they usually form in some patterns that you can see. And so there's this dark area that I'm putting in is a bit of a wave front that is just building towards the shore, and then we're going to come in with some lighter colors for the troughs or the flat areas between these, and these will gradually disappear as you move back into the painting. And so I am trying to do fairly random marks. And this is a pretty small painting, so we're not going to, pretty small for me anyway. I'm not going to fret about trying to get super precise on anything in here. Just want to get the idea of this water in motion. So I'm going to pick up a little bit of white. That would be quite a chunk, but so I want to use a little bit of phthalo. This is the trough color, and you can see phthalo blue is substantially stronger than ultramarine blue, and so a little goes a long way. So this is just a little bit of the trough color. Looks to be a little bit on the light side, but like I say, it's going to dry darker, so I think it's probably the right value. Just going to switch brushes. I can say I really like the way that. This is a slightly newer rigger that is going to hold a bit more of a point. Just water brush now, so no paint on the brush, just using water to pull out some of the wet paint that's down there. GoPro stop recording. So I'm just going to throw in, and it's probably going to need to be lighter than that, some of the white caps farther back. But one of the tricks here is not to make them white. They're in the distance, and if we put something of light value in the distance, it's going to come forward and not look like a natural white cap. And then the other thing we want to do is we want to try and be as random as we can. And sometimes when you're looking at them, they may not look quite right, or look a bit funny in their natural state. So I'll change that just so that they look a little bit more natural. I'm also going to come in and put a glaze, just using water and paint on the bottom part. So we're just going to use a fairly dark glaze. And so I'm going to be darkening here, but as well as the bottom part of these rocks. So I'm just going to go over that. Hit that a little bit more. Take your paint off and then just soften the top of that. We'll run some along the bottom. And then from here on in, it's pretty much just tweaking it here and there. So I'll put the back land in as well, but that's a good example of how to do rock. Okay, GoPro stop recording. So I'm just going to throw in, and it's probably going to need to be lighter than that, some of the white caps farther back. But one of the tricks here is not to make them white. They're in the distance, and if we put something of light value in the distance, it's going to come forward and not look like a natural white cap. And then the other thing we want to do is we want to try and be as random as we can. And sometimes when you're looking at them, they may not look quite right, or look a bit funny in their natural state. So I'll change that just so that they look a little bit more natural. I'm also going to come in and put a glaze, just using water and paint on the bottom part. So we're just going to use a fairly dark glaze. And so I'm going to be darkening here, but as well as the bottom part of these rocks. So I'm just going to go over that. that a little bit more. Take the paint off and then just soften the top of that. And then from here on in, it's pretty much just tweaking it here and there. So I'll put the back land in as well, but